Kia ora and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Lounge, the space for healthcare leaders like you to take a moment to get a pause, a breath and a fresh perspective on the work that you're doing. I'm Katie. I've got a background in working in healthcare for over 30 years and I now get to work with leaders and their teams to help them feel supported and encouraged in the work that you are doing. And it's great to be back again this week. Now heads up, right? I think I've made it clear that I'm definitely not a script person. I often take notes. And I have this like, that's what I want to talk about. And it is all in my head. I have got a few open tabs. I've got a book by my side. It's going to be one of those episodes. And it's actually the first time I'm sitting down recording going, you know what, this might not work. But you know what? I was sitting writing a list of kind of some of the challenges and the issues that people are struggling with right now. And that's where this topic came up. And I want to talk about the SCARF model. Now, if you've never heard of this before, I'll tell you a funny story to start with. I can still remember the time I was introduced to the SCARF model and I was kind of like going, oh my God, that explains so many things. And wise woman who's one of my mentors and the people that I look up to all the time, she was describing it and she drew the arrows on the board and she talked about threat and safety and all of this kind of stuff and it was brilliant. Anyway, I'll get to the funny story in a minute. Roll on a few months or years, whatever it is, and I'm sitting down doing a blog years ago, admittedly, and I want to write about the SCARF model. So I just Google SCARF. Let me just tell you, you get pictures of woolly scarves to wrap around your neck. So my top tip, if you do want to just Google it, is to put the little dots in between it or to write David Rock, or maybe Google has moved on. I don't know. I haven't re-Googled it since then, to be quite honest. Anyway, so I want to talk about the SCARF model and focus down into one of the elements, but let me just back up the bus a little bit. So the SCARF model is an acronym for the 5 domains of human experience that, according to David Rock, or how David Rock, who was the creator of the model, has described and kind of, coordinated how we get activated in terms of either threat or reward. So our brains can work out really quickly, is this something that is a threat to me or is this something that is safe and I can move towards? So it's all that stuff about our development as human beings and how the brain has developed. So he's kind of put it into these 5 domains, and that's what SCARF is an acronym for. So our 5 points for SCARF stand for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Now, since learning about SCARF, it has been one of those models that it's not overly complicated to understand. And what I have learned over the years is that it is applicable and shows up in so many places. So one of my early experiences of actually using it in a group was to talk through SCARF as a part of a big change that was going on. So it's particularly connected with that idea of change, because often we can see change as a threat. So we look at if we look at a change that you're going through or that is occurring through those 5 domains, you can get some ideas about what to do. One of my big memory points about where I just naturally tapped into SCARF was when COVID first kicked off, and I was meeting with a lot of the team I was working with, the charge nurses and all of that, and the level of anxiety was massive. And I knew there's a whole lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what's going to happen. And so in terms of SCARF, certainty was completely threatened and off the radar. And so what I did in that moment was to remind them of what is staying the same. So I was trying to move them from this very threatened state of, oh my goodness, we have no idea what's going on, to, okay, what's going to stay the same? We are still going to be delivering great patient care. We are still going to be saying hello to each other as we come in. We are still, so it's what is not changing, what is staying the same. So giving them a sense of certainty. And you could see them all starting to take a breath and just reminding them about, oh yeah, we've got this. We've got this. So that's one of my lovely examples of it. Now, on the flip side, I want to share a couple of moments where I really lost it. Hold on, there's a preamble. There's always a preamble, isn't there? So another great way you can use the scarf. So I've used it. I've got these little cards that I made, and it's got the word like status, and on the back it's got just a bit of an explanation about what that actually stands for. And a couple of people that had to work together and really weren't working together particularly well. They were just rubbing each up on every level. And we just sat down over a coffee, and I got out these cards and go, hey, just put them in. This is what it is. Explained it, and I said, put it in the order of importance for you. And what was surprising was how similar their order of importance was. And they started to share why, and they started to see points of connection with each other. And no, it didn't magically make their relationship perfect, but it did give them a connection point so they could start to relate to each other in a different way. Now, over the years since I've done that exercise with someone, with those two people, I've learned I've got a whole other host of activities and different ways that you can do that. But I'm just trying to, I guess, explain the multiple ways that SCARF can be applied for. But you can do, so while it's written in that order of status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness, you can do a little online little check test, and you answer some questions, and what's your kind of like your top thing, the thing that's most important to you, or the thing that you definitely crave the most. So when I've done this, I mean, it can range from all sorts of things, but relatedness and fairness often come out really high when you're talking with healthcare people, because this is a lot about how we deliver care, but the people that we're working with and all of that kind of stuff. And curiously, status often comes out quite lowly. And that was certainly what I thought. And certainly when I've done the test, the status came out. But interestingly, and I suppose it's just the magic of neuroscience, I don't think a neuroscientist would like that. The magic of neuroscience, that's kind of like an oxymoron. I'm now losing it. Okay, pull yourself together. So the time I really lost it was actually a moment when my status was challenged and threatened. Now, admittedly, context for this embarrassing moment in possibly one of my worst moments in my career was the very tired, very stressful job, not coping, not getting the help, overwhelmed, all of that stuff. So a bit of a recipe for disaster. And I'm expecting to be able to use this room for a meeting, because I'm now in a shared office because I've given up my office because blah, blah, blah. And the person says to me, one of the admin person says to me, that's not what that room's for. You can't do that. And I kind of flipped out at her, to be quite honest, kind of saying, I'm the manager. I used all my status things to throw at her, like I'm in charge here. Who the hell do you think I am if I can't do it? What it is? So really, and it was in public. It was awful. And I kind of got very, very, very upset and stormed out and thought I was never going to come back to work ever again. That could have been the end of my healthcare career. So there you go. Quickly, did you notice I talked quicker and quicker then? Because I really wanted to get that very embarrassing, one of my top 5 worst moments in my career out of the way quickly. Aside, I went back, I did apologise. I did go back, thankfully, because someone came out and got me and wrapped their arms literally and metaphorically around me to look after me and give me confidence to go back and to give me some element of self-compassion. But when I had calmed down and when I had got a bit of perspective and reflected on that little moment, I was most curious. If status doesn't matter to me, or if that's what I've told myself, status doesn't matter to me, why was that such an enormous trigger? Why was that such an enormous trigger? Why did I react so out of the blue? So that was just one of those points. And I have obviously, delved into that. And there's, while we, in a normal good day, we would put them in certain orders. But actually, when we are in a depleted and threatened state, our brains can't tell the difference. It's really interesting. So the SCARF model, I guess, and I'm making this bit up at this point, the SCARF model is around how can we make something that is as complex as what our brains are doing every second of the day into something that we can understand? Because actually, when you look at all of those 5 domains, there's all these kind of overlaps and connections around, like certainty and autonomy. There's definitely those overreactions. And if you've got more status, maybe you've got more autonomy. So there's a lot of these super connections. So it's not like, this is how the brain is thinking about it. This is to help us understand the complexity of what our brain does. So that was kind of a useful thing. The other times that I've tapped into it from a personal perspective is when I've realized that I'm just acting not normally. I'm not acting as I would like to act. And it's that reflection that actually when I go through those elements, all of those domains have been triggered. And so what I'm doing is actually a normal human response to threat. Because our brains don't realise the social threats are as big as the same as a physical threat. So social threats, so things like if your job's being questioned or your experience is being questioned or the way you do your job or who you work with or where you sit or how much you get paid, all of that stuff, these social threats are as big a threat to our brains even though it's not actually going to kill us, So I love the fact that when anyone is talking about that, talks about a saber-toothed tiger. Clearly they're calmer before they say saber-toothed. I'm not going to say it again. You know what I mean. So it's about the fact that we have evolved in a certain way, but our brains haven't quite caught up to the fact that most of these social threats aren't actually going to kill us, but we still react in the same way. So when I was realizing that absolutely every single of those 5 domains are being triggered, I could actually, give myself some self-compassion. I can kind of go, this is okay. Okay, maybe I'm not acting and behaving in the way that would be ideal, but now I've got some perspective and realizing I'm actually having a normal human response. Now I can lean into how do I want to respond. So understanding the model and being able to reflect on my own behavior gave me that perspective and pause so that I could choose a different way of acting. And when you look at one of the articles by David Rock, one of the key ones that's come out, it's a lot about that. How do you do something? How do you look at the SCARF model before an event, after an event, and during an event? And how can you use it to regulate matters? So there's heaps of research out there on this model, so it's really good. And I did want to tap into that idea of status and I've got really curious about it in the healthcare's current context, because for good or bad, evil or not, healthcare is a very hierarchical system. And so where you sit in that system makes a big difference, doesn't it, about who's the boss and who reports to you and, where you sit in that. And at the moment, an awful lot of that is being upended. With layers of regional and national coming in, national teams coming in and things. So it's where do I fit? Seems to have been the question. And so I got curious about that in terms of, okay, so status, it's less maybe about where am I in this hierarchy, and more about this idea of where you fit in the world. One of the articles or the blog posts I found talked about status in terms of how you see yourself and how others see you. So it's a bit different to where am I fitting in this hierarchy model. It was the how you see yourself and how others see you. And so this was this idea of where and how do I belong in this space? Where do I fit in this space? And I think that's almost a deeper question to be asking with any change that goes on, and with any kind of particularly when you've worked hard towards a particular position and then it's now on particularly rocky grounds. I mean, the number of people whose roles are just becoming disestablished. I mean, all of a sudden you've gone from someone who's holding a job in this particular organisation to my job doesn't count anymore. What must that do to your threatened feeling about status? So that's why I wanted to dive into this one, because I just think I kind of get the impression that that's what a lot of people will be sitting niggling with around this, where do I fit in? And so I got kind of intrigued by this idea. And there's a lot around this space of belonging and a lot of work. And one of the people, as you know, probably that I often turn to is Brené Brown. And she talks about belonging and this is why I kind of see this connection with the SCARF model, because one of her quotes is, we have to belong to ourselves as much as we need to belong to others. So it's this idea that you've got to be kind of certain in who you are. What are you here for? What do I believe in? Almost as that sort of grounding or kicking off point for understanding your status in terms of where you fit in. A lot of her work, and I agree with this entirely, this idea that we are actually hardwired for connection and we need to belong. That survival instinct or the survival need or whatever comes to that belonging space. So when we feel we don't belong, then we're going to perceive that as a threat. So there's this complete connection here with this threatened status, as David Rock is describing from status, but the fact that if we don't belong, then we're going to feel threatened. And then there's this ideas of how different cultures consider status in a different way. So, you know, my space of white privilege and the way I've been brought up, the education, and even in the healthcare system, it's very much on individual achievement rather than a relational belonging and how we're all doing. So I think that could be one of those interesting conversations that you could get into around actually how are you viewing status based on the different cultures that you are actually working with, and how are different people. So I might see something as a particular threat and it will be seen differently by somebody from a different culture and a different upbringing to me. The other thing that can occur with this idea of status and belonging is that you can create these in-groups and out-groups, right? And I remember a bleak moment when it was very obvious I was in the out-group and they all kind of wandered off, and this kind of like real social threat of I don't belong there anymore, they're excluding me. And I don't believe that they were aware of the impact of that particular action and how it played out. So I think this is a really curious point as we're working through whether it be small change in your team to just the way you're working generally. It's really easy for in-groups and out-groups. And I think for leaders, I was once accused of having, or not accused, that's the wrong word. It was pointed out to me that there was a couple of nurses that I saw as favourites when I was a charge nurse. And I really took that on board because I was like, oh my goodness, okay, yeah, and that would make the others feel like they were in the out group. And when you've got that sort of status difference, I was the charge nurses, they were the team of registered nurses. If there's some people that look like they're in the in group, what does that mean? So I think as a leader, you've got a lot of work to do in this space around what am I using to decide who's higher up in my ranking than in lower status positions. So this idea of belonging, status, exclusion, I think really interesting aspect of this. You can tell I've done some thinking around this, can't you? Now, I think earlier I kind of mentioned this idea of where do I fit in? And that's interesting because a bit more of Brené Brown's work here is that she really distinguishes between belonging, which is being accepted as you are, and fitting in, which is having to alter yourself to gain acceptance. So again, another leadership role in this moment and a point of how can I do this? How am I doing this? Is creating that environment where people feel that belonging is not tied to a particular marker of status. And I think this is a good example of this is that when you've got some of those multidisciplinary teams around stuff. So it's actually, have we decided that the doctor's voice is more important than the physio's voice? How do we create that space where we're not having to use our status as getting more of a voice, I guess? I may have gone off topic there. That would not be the first or a surprise to any of you listening. these all kind of lead, or all of those comments kind of lead to this idea of psychological safety and this space where that if you are respected and you belong for who you are and your status, as in what you are bringing into that room, is respected and welcomed, then you're more likely to collaborate effectively, contribute ideas, more likely to take risks. And I know risk is one of those dodgy conversations to have, and yes, it'll be on the list along with psychological safety, because that's a massive topic. Top tip, going to look for people work. Amy Edmondson is usually the first person people mention when talking about psychological safety. So that's this inclusive leadership is going to strengthen belonging, and it's not your status as to who you are and where you're fitting is respected. So when you look at some of the more traditional interpretations of status and how you increase the safety element of status for people, it's often around feedback, which I thought was really interesting. And I have to confess, got a little bit stumped when I think about the context I gave it around roles being disestablished, teams being reorganised, not knowing if you're going to have a job, all of those elements, and where do you fit in the hierarchy that is being redrawn, I suppose. So some of the things that they suggest around how to support or prevent a threat response, or to increase someone's sense of safety in this element of status, is to identify and draw on people's areas of expertise. And I think one of a powerful exercise that I've often done with people that are feeling like they have got nothing to offer, they're not qualified for the job, all of that sort of stuff, is to do a career timeline and to draw out all the different jobs that you have done and the skills or the things that you have done that you are proud of during those different jobs. And actually, when you draw them all out, you're actually are now suddenly like, oh, right, here's my expertise. This is what I've got. And it allows you to come back to that idea, that sense of belonging in yourself, but also then quieten down that threat response around where do I fit in? I don't belong anywhere. Oh my goodness, my status. I don't think people walk around going, my status is being threatened, but that's the kind of, I think what's going on kind of stuff around the what's going on here? Where do I fit? Where am I going to fit going forward? So there's your top tip. One of your top tips around do a career timeline for yourself or for the people that you're working with, and pulling out those areas of expertise, things that people are proud of, things that they have delivered and done, so that you're boosting that space of who I am, what I do, and what I do really well. I found a really interesting thing on the feedback thing and status in a paper that was done. So I'm going to read a bit of it here just so that I've got it right. So Rock asserted that it's relatively easy to trigger a status threat inadvertently by, for example, suggesting someone has been ineffective at a task. For most people asking, can I offer you some feedback, generates a similar physiological response to hearing footsteps behind you at night. So it's really easy to trigger that, could you come into my office? Could I have a word with you? You've all been there. You've all probably done it as well as been on the receiving end of it. So that's that kind of connection with the status that you're about to be torn down a strip or two, or that you've done something wrong. So again, that when we think about what's going on right now, how we start the conversations can make a big difference to that threat response. So on the flip side of that, easy to trigger a reward and a safety sort of space by giving positive feedback and talking to people about what they have done well. So the whole idea of appreciative feedback, which I often bang on about quite excessively, that's one of those spaces that's going to help boost that idea of someone's status and their safety in that element. So I guess, wrapping up there, having shared some of my worst moments and some of the great things that I've done and the different ways that SCARF can be applied and used. Oh, another good one. I've done a blog post on this, and it was really, I used the SCARF model as a reflection tool to look at your meetings, and the kind of, if you've got hopefully not already, because we have only just kicked off the year, but when you get into the thrust of it and it's kind of like back-to-back meetings all day, every day, used the SCARF model to assess your kind of calendar of meetings. That's an interesting read, a bit challenging maybe for some people. So I will do the thing in the show notes, so you've got a link to that. So that's quite interesting. Oh, now what was I saying? So why does any of this matter? What does it matter if you're having a threat response? I guess I possibly should have started with that. See, the thing is, when we're in that sort of space, we become very insular. We become very protective, very defensive. We withdraw quite a lot. We are not able to see big solutions or potentials or possibilities. We don't collaborate as well. We're not hearing clearly. We are, so if we think about the context of the challenge and the importance and the value of the work that you are doing every day in healthcare, you kind of need those things. You kind of need to be able to work collaboratively. You need to be able to think of solutions. You need to be able to think of positive actions. And so what I worry about right now is that there are so many people with this kind of low to middling to high level of threat going on, and we've almost normalized it because so many of these components are being threatened right now. And so the awareness of the model gives you some sort of insight, so you can be some self-compassion towards yourself around how you might be behaving, but also to shine a light on some awareness about the stuff that actually, are you showing up and behaving in the way that you actually want to, or that is going to be most useful for the context, the role, the environment that you're in. Everybody in the entire system is under some level of pressure, demand, and uncomfortableness, pretty much. And even if it's not to do with the bigger changes that are going on, I'm thinking about some of my colleagues that are working in England and in America, and they're still, healthcare is never going to be easy, right? It's never going to be a walk in the park. There is always some change of some sort going on, but there's always so many different things happening. So this is This is kind of a thing that would happen anywhere. It doesn't need to be a big organisational change that's going on in Aotearoa, New Zealand at the moment. So we've done a summary of the SCARF model, what it is, this idea of threat, safety that's going on within our brains that is sort of a human response. We've dived down more into that idea of status and connected it with this idea of where do I fit in this world and how do I belong, and belonging to myself, but belonging to where do I belong? And then flipping that around and as a leader going, okay, how am I increasing the sense of belonging for other people, particularly at times of great change? And then an introduction to just a couple of ways to try and think about how can you start to increase people's feeling of safety from that neuroscience perspective at times when there can be so much going on and there can be so much of this triggering going on around various different elements. So reminders, so SCARF, we've got status, we've talked about it quite a lot, we've got certainty, which is that assurance of you know what's going to be going on in a day. Now I think certainty would probably go down the bottom for most people in healthcare, because one of the things I enjoy about working in healthcare and what I enjoy about what I do now is you never know what's going to happen. Autonomy, big one for me, which is one of the reasons why I'm now working for myself, but it's that ability to be in control of doing what you want to be doing. Relatedness, this is about the relationships, the communication, the people that you're working with and how it all comes together. And fairness, now that could be a whole other dive down, isn't it, in terms of what we understand and feel about in fairness. And so it's was that unfair, was that just? We can bring in equality and equity and all of that kind of stuff. So they're the 5 domains. Lots of research out there. I'll put a whole load of show notes and links to the various different things, because it can be, there's some really quite research-based deep articles. There was a great one I was I would like to say reading, I think skim reading / flipping to the end, article about how they used it for change in a nursing unit, how they actually did a bit of scoring on it before, during and after. And how applying tactics to proactively support the safety component from a neuroscience point of view had an influence on the success of the change. So it can be used in lots of cases. Change isn't a frequent word it gets mentioned in. Used on a personal basis, used for team conversations as well. One of the coolest tools that I've been introduced to, and a big thanks to Jill Saul. I will shout out her for being the person that first introduced me to it and the work of David Rock. Alrighty. Oh my lordy, we're at 30 minutes now. I have had some pauses where I've actually just taken a breath and gone, what am I going to say next? I will edit those out. Someone was asking me this week, how much do you edit? It ain't a lot, let me tell you. And because you know how bad I am at trying to find the pause button, I just let it play and I just be quiet. That's quite interesting. So I do cut out the very long pauses that I have. Alrighty. Thank you for listening to another one. I really hope it felt like a bit of a deeper one this time around this. And yeah, when you're going to be talking about neuroscience and models like that, it's never going to be a light-hearted episode. But I guess it's just a big shout out for the value and the added value for the SCARF model and understanding it was one of the big turning points for my career. So definitely recommend you go and have a check it out. I wish you all the best for whatever this week is bringing you. Thank you again for listening to the Leadership Lounge. I am Katie. I am your host. I am supposed to give you a plug to remind you to sign up for my email at katiequinney.com/subscribe, or noodle around is my latest phrase. Noodle around on the website because there's a heap of different resources that will be just what you need right now. There's a whole range of stuff out there and you can download those for free, and that gets you into the email list as well. So there you go. Thank you for listening. Take care. Have a great week, and I will be back next week for another episode of the Leadership Lounge.